The sterile hospital room felt colder than death itself when the surgeon looked Hudson straight in the eyes and said, "I'm sorry, but we don't perform procedures on patients with your lifestyle." Hudson stared in disbelief as his chance at survival slipped away because of who he loved. His heart, already weakened by a congenital defect that had gone undiagnosed until last month, pounded against his ribs like it was trying to escape the betrayal. At 32, Hudson had built a quiet life in Chicago as a graphic designer, sketching city skylines by day and sharing quiet evenings with Dominic in their Lincoln Park apartment. Now those evenings felt like a distant dream. The words hung in the air while the monitor beside his bed beeped steadily, indifferent to the storm inside him. Dr. Harlan, a man in his 50s with steel-gray hair and the kind of authoritative posture that usually inspired trust, closed the chart with a decisive snap. "Your risk profile is simply too high. We have to consider complications. Lifestyle factors play a role, and the board agrees." Hudson's mouth went dry. He knew exactly what lifestyle factors meant. It wasn't the clean blood work, the negative HIV test, or the fact that he had never touched drugs. It was the photo of Dominic on his phone that the nurse had seen when he asked for someone to call his emergency contact. "Doctor, please," Hudson managed, voice cracking. "I've waited months for this valve repair." Without it, he couldn't finish. The surgeon's eyes flicked away, already moving toward the door. "We recommend conservative management. Talk to your partner about options." The door clicked shut, leaving Hudson alone with the echo of prejudice he thought America had outgrown. His phone felt heavy in his hand when he finally dialed. Dominic answered on the second ring, voice bright from the coffee shop where he worked as a barista. "Hey, babe, how'd the consult go?" Hudson swallowed hard. "They said no. They said no because of us." Silence stretched across the line, then Dominic's sharp intake of breath. "I'm coming. Right now. Don't move." 20 minutes later, Dominic burst through the door, dark curls wild, brown eyes flashing with fury and fear. He was 28, built lean from years of running marathons to clear his head, and the only person who had ever made Hudson feel truly seen. Dominic pulled him into a careful hug, mindful of the 4 lines. "We'll fight this. I swear we will." That night in the apartment, the 2 men sat on the couch surrounded by takeout containers neither had touched. Dominic paced while Hudson stared at the city lights beyond the window. "I looked it up," Dominic said. "There are laws. The Affordable Care Act, Section 1557. Discrimination based on sex includes sexual orientation now. We can sue." Hudson laughed bitterly. "And meanwhile my heart is ticking like a bomb. What if I don't have time for lawyers?" Dominic knelt in front of him, hands on Hudson's knees. "Then we find another hospital, another surgeon. I'm not letting you go because some bigot in a white coat decided your love makes you disposable." The next morning, Hudson's mother called from her small town in Indiana. He had come out to her 5 years ago in a tearful phone call that ended with her hanging up. She had softened slightly since, sending birthday cards with careful handwriting, but never mentioning Dominic. Today her voice was tight. "The hospital called me as next of kin before they realized. Hudson, honey, maybe this is a sign. Maybe if you reconsidered things." Hudson closed his eyes. "Mom, I'm not reconsidering who I am to save my life. That's not how it works." She sighed. "I just want you alive." The call ended with both of them crying on opposite ends of the state. Dominic watched from the kitchen, stirring coffee neither wanted. "Your dad's still pretending I don't exist?" Hudson nodded. The weight of family silence pressed heavier than the hospital refusal. By afternoon they had an appointment with a civil rights attorney downtown. The waiting room smelled of fresh paint and desperation. When their names were called, a sharp-eyed woman named Elena Martinez shook their hands firmly. "Tell me everything. We're going to make noise." As they left the office 2 hours later with a thick folder of paperwork, Hudson felt the first flicker of something besides fear, anger, clean and bright. He turned to Dominic on the sidewalk, the September wind tugging at their jackets. "I'm not dying quietly. Not for them. Not for anyone." Dominic kissed him right there on Michigan Avenue, quick and fierce, a promise sealed in public view. Passers-by glanced away or smiled. Chicago had seen worse. But for Hudson it felt like the first act of rebellion in a war he never asked to fight. Back home, he opened his sketchbook for the first time in weeks. Instead of cityscapes, he drew a heart cracked down the middle, one half labeled love, the other survival. Dominic watched over his shoulder. We're going to make them redraw that picture. Hudson leaned back into the solid warmth of the man he loved and let himself believe it might be possible. The fight had only just begun, but for the first time since the surgeon's words, Hudson felt alive enough to wage it. The days blurred into a frantic rhythm of phone calls, medical records, and second opinions. Dominic took a leave from the coffee shop, using every vacation day he had saved for their postponed trip to New Orleans. Instead, they spent it in waiting rooms across Chicago. One cardiologist at Northwestern listened patiently, reviewed the files, then shook his head. Technically, Harlan's assessment isn't illegal yet. The hospital can cite risk management. But morally, it's garbage. He referred them to a colleague in Boston who specialized in high-risk valve repairs, but the waitlist was 6 months. Hudson's symptoms worsened. Shortness of breath climbing stairs, nights spent propped on pillows. Dominic learned to check his pulse at 3 a.m., whispering reassurance until Hudson drifted back to sleep. Family pressure mounted from unexpected directions. Hudson's younger brother, Tyler, flew in from Indianapolis for the weekend. They had always been close until Hudson came out. Now Tyler's hugs were stiff. Over pizza in the apartment, Tyler finally spoke. Mom's worried sick. Dad says you're throwing your life away for this. He gestured vaguely at Dominic, who stood washing dishes with deliberate calm. Hudson set his slice down. This is the man who's been holding me together while my own blood refuses to pick up the phone. Tyler looked away. I'm not saying I agree with the hospital. I'm just saying maybe keep it private until you're fixed. Dominic turned off the faucet. He's not broken, Tyler. And neither is our love. The conversation ended in awkward silence, Tyler leaving with a half-hearted promise to call. That night Dominic and Hudson lay in bed, city traffic humming far below. I keep thinking about the first time I saw you, Dominic said softly. Hudson smiled into the dark. At the Pride Parade 3 years ago, you spilled iced coffee all over my shirt trying to hand me a flyer. Dominic chuckled. Best accident of my life. You looked so serious with your sketchbook, like you were documenting history instead of marching in it. Hudson turned to face him. You made me want to be part of the history, not just watch it. Their foreheads touched, breaths mingling. No grand declarations, just the quiet certainty that whatever came next, they faced it together. The lawsuit paperwork arrived by courier the following week. Elena had filed an emergency injunction citing discrimination and medical negligence. The hospital's legal team responded within 48 hours with a motion to dismiss, claiming the decision was purely clinical. Hudson read the documents at the kitchen table while Dominic cooked pasta. They're calling my orientation a behavioral risk factor, like I'm the one who caused my heart defect. Dominic set a plate in front of him. Eat, then we write your statement. Every word counts. Hudson poured his soul onto paper late into the night. How the denial made him question his worth. How Dominic's steady presence kept him fighting. How fear of dying alone because of who he loved felt worse than the physical pain. When he finally slept, Dominic stayed up reading the statement, tears tracking silently down his cheeks. By morning he had added his own affidavit, describing the nights he held Hudson through panic attacks, the way love had become their strongest medicine. News of the filing leaked to a local LGBTQ+ blog. Suddenly Hudson's phone buzzed with messages from strangers offering support, stories of their own denials, offers of prayers and protest signs. One message stood out. From a man named Marcus in rural Wisconsin who had been refused treatment for an infection after his partner died of AIDS in the 90s. You're fighting for all of us, it read. Hudson read it aloud to Dominic over breakfast. We're not alone, Dominic said, squeezing his hand. For the first time, the fight felt bigger than one man's heart. The preliminary hearing was set for October. Hudson's symptoms had progressed enough that another doctor at Rush University agreed to monitor him closely, buying precious time. But each echocardiogram showed the valve leaking worse. Dominic drove him to every appointment, humming old songs to distract him from the sterile smell. In the car on the way home one afternoon, Hudson broke. "What if I lose? What if this is it?" Dominic pulled over, killed the engine, and cupped Hudson's face. "Then we'll have loved fiercely right until the end. And that's more than most people ever get." They sat in the parked car as rain streaked the windows, two men holding onto each other while the world outside kept turning. Winter arrived early in Chicago, blanketing the city in snow that matched the chill inside Hudson's chest. The injunction was denied. The judge cited insufficient evidence of intentional discrimination. Elena promised an appeal, but appeals took time Hudson might not have. Dominic sold his motorcycle to cover mounting medical bills. Hudson watched him sign the title over with a steady hand and felt another crack form in his resolve. "I never wanted to be the reason you give up pieces of yourself," he whispered that night. Dominic kissed his temple. "You're not taking pieces. You're giving me purpose." They found a support group through the local LGBTQ+ center, men who had faced similar medical gatekeeping. Every Tuesday evening in a church basement warmed by bad coffee and fierce hugs, Hudson listened to stories that mirrored his own. There was Javier, a teacher denied fertility preservation before chemo because the clinic assumed gay men didn't want children. There was Ryan, whose emergency appendectomy was delayed while staff debated lifestyle counseling. Each tale chipped away at Hudson's isolation and forged something new: determination. At home he began sketching again, not just hearts but entire scenes. Two men walking hand in hand past hospital doors that slammed shut, then the same men standing taller on the other side. Dominic framed the first one and hung it above their bed. "Our future," he said simply. Hudson's health continued its slow decline. Simple tasks left him winded. Dominic learned to carry the groceries, to adjust the shower temperature so Hudson wouldn't strain, to hold him when the panic came at 2 a.m. Their love deepened in the small acts of care, becoming a language beyond words. Christmas was quiet. Hudson's family sent a card with no return address. Dominic's parents, who had embraced their son years ago, flew in from Seattle and filled the apartment with laughter and tamales. For 3 days the four of them played board games and watched old movies, pretending the shadow over Hudson's heart wasn't growing. On Christmas Eve, Dominic's mother pulled Hudson aside in the kitchen. "You fight, Mijo. For both of you." Hudson nodded, throat tight, and for the first time felt what chosen family could mean. New Year's Eve found them on the roof of their building wrapped in blankets, watching fireworks bloom over the lake. Hudson's breath came shallow, but Dominic's arm around him was solid. "Whatever happens this year," Dominic said, "I'm yours." Hudson leaned into him. "And I'm yours, even if the world tries to tear us apart." The fireworks painted their faces in gold and crimson, and for one perfect moment the future felt possible. January brought the appeal hearing. Elena presented new evidence, internal hospital emails unearthed through discovery that referenced high-risk demographics in ways that clearly targeted gay patients. The judge ordered the hospital to reconsider the surgery within 30 days or face contempt. The victory was small, but it tasted like hope. Hudson's new cardiologist at Rush scheduled the procedure for February 14th, Valentine's Day. "A little poetic justice," the doctor joked. Dominic laughed through tears. The night before surgery, Hudson couldn't sleep. Dominic stayed awake with him, tracing patterns on his back. "Tell me what you're scared of," he whispered. Hudson spoke into the dark. The pain, the possibility of waking up alone, the fear that prejudice had already done irreversible damage. Dominic listened without fixing, simply holding space until Hudson's breathing evened. At dawn they drove to the hospital together. Dominic kissed him before the gurney rolled away. "I'll be right here when you wake up. Always." The surgery lasted 6 hours. When Hudson opened his eyes in recovery, the first face he saw was Dominic's, exhausted and radiant. "It worked," the surgeon said later. "Your heart is stronger than we expected." Hudson squeezed Dominic's hand, too weak to speak, but the look they shared said everything. In the days that followed, as monitors beeped and nurses checked vitals, Hudson felt something shift inside him. Not just the new valve, but a deeper certainty. He had survived the denial. Now he would survive the life that came after. Spring thawed Chicago, and Hudson's recovery bloomed alongside the tulips in Lincoln Park. Physical therapy 3 times a week rebuilt his strength. Dominic celebrated every milestone with homemade dinners and long walks along the lake. Hudson returned to his design job part-time, sketching again with a surer hand. The lawsuit had settled out of court. The hospital paid a modest sum and issued a private apology. It wasn't enough, but it was something. More importantly, Hudson began volunteering at the LGBTQ+ Center, sharing his story with new groups of men facing similar battles. One warm April evening he met Marcus in person, the man from Wisconsin whose message had meant so much. Marcus was 60 now, silver-haired and gentle, running a small support network for queer elders. Over coffee, Marcus told Hudson about losing his partner in 1994, when hospitals still listed AIDS as the official cause of every symptom. "They treated us like we deserved it," Marcus said quietly. "You're changing that narrative." Hudson felt the weight of legacy settle on his shoulders, not as burden but as purpose. Dominic watched the transformation with quiet pride. His own job had become more demanding after the coffee shop expanded, but he still made time to attend every support group night with Hudson. Their relationship settled into a rhythm deeper than the early passion. Comfortable, resilient, tested by fire. On weekends they drove to Michigan beaches, walking barefoot in the sand, talking about the future they had almost lost. Dominic spoke of maybe adopting someday. Hudson sketched tiny houses they might build together. The dreams felt real now, yet cracks appeared in unexpected places. Hudson's mother finally visited in June. She arrived with a suitcase and tentative hugs, avoiding Dominic's eyes at first. Over dinner she admitted the hospital had contacted her again during the lawsuit, feeding her fears about gay lifestyle risks. Hudson listened without anger this time. "Mom, I almost died because someone decided my love made me unworthy. I need you to see me. All of me." She cried then, real tears, and for the first time asked Dominic about his life, his dreams. The healing was slow, imperfect, but it began. Hudson's work at the center grew. He started a weekly art therapy session where men drew their hearts, literal and metaphorical. One participant, a quiet accountant named Leo, had been denied mental health coverage after coming out at his company clinic. Together they created a mural for the center lobby. A city skyline where every building was a heart, some cracked but mended with gold. The local news covered the unveiling. Hudson stood beside Dominic in front of cameras, no longer afraid to be seen. Summer brought heat waves and new challenges. A national study on cardiac outcomes began citing Hudson's case anonymously as evidence that lifestyle assumptions had no statistical basis. Elena called with the news. "Your fight is changing policy." Hudson hung up and pulled Dominic into a long embrace on their balcony. "We did this," he whispered. Dominic smiled against his neck. "You did this. I just loved you through it." By August, Hudson was running short distances again. He and Dominic trained for a 5K pride run, crossing the finish line hand in hand amid cheers. That night they danced in their living room to old songs, laughter mixing with sweat. Hudson looked at the man who had refused to let him go and felt gratitude so deep it ached. The journey had scarred them both, but the scars told a story of survival and love that refused to be erased. Fall painted the city in amber and red, and with it came the first whispers of the medical truth that would unravel everything. A prestigious journal published a groundbreaking study led by researchers at Johns Hopkins. The paper analyzed thousands of cases, including Hudson's anonymized data, and proved conclusively that sexual orientation had zero correlation with surgical complication rates in valve repairs. More damningly, internal hospital algorithms had been programmed with outdated biases from the 1980s AIDS crisis, automatically flagging gay male patients for elevated risk regardless of actual test results. The study named no names, but insiders knew. Elena's phone call came at 7 a.m. on a Tuesday. "The emails we found?" They're just the tip. A whistleblower from your old hospital just went public. They're reopening every denied case from the last decade. Hudson sat at the kitchen table, coffee forgotten. Dominic stood frozen by the sink. What does that mean for us? Hudson asked. Lawsuits, congressional hearings, possible criminal charges for the administrators who knew. The city outside their window kept moving, oblivious to the earthquake starting beneath its hospitals. Within days, the story exploded across national media. Chicago hospital under fire for anti-gay medical bias ran the headlines. Dr. Harlan's face appeared on every screen, his earlier statements now dissected by pundits. The hospital issued a vague statement about reviewing protocols. But the damage was done. Patients who had been denied care years earlier began coming forward. Men, women, non-binary people, all caught in the same algorithmic trap. Hudson's support group doubled in size overnight. He spent hours on the phone offering what guidance he could, his own voice steadier than he felt. Dominic watched the chaos with protective fury. They almost killed you to protect their statistics. Hudson pulled him close. But they didn't. And now the truth is out because we fought. Together they attended the first press conference outside the hospital. Hudson stood at the podium, Dominic's hand on his lower back for support. I was told my love made me too risky to save, he said into the microphones. Today that lie is being exposed. For every person still waiting for care, we see you. The crowd roared. Cameras flashed. Hudson felt the weight of every man who had come before him and everyone who would come after. Inside the hospital, panic spread. Board members resigned. Lawyers swarmed the administrative floors. Dr. Harlan was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Hudson received a formal letter offering a public apology and full coverage of any future care. He read it aloud to Dominic that night, voice thick. It's not enough, but it's a start. Dominic nodded. The real win is every kid who won't have to hear what you heard. As winter approached again, the scandal reached Washington. A Senate subcommittee scheduled hearings. Elena called Hudson. They want you to testify. Hudson looked at Dominic across the room. I'll do it, but only if you're beside me. Dominic smiled. Always. The hearings were set for January. Hudson spent the holidays preparing his statement. Dominic by his side with endless cups of tea and quiet encouragement. On New Year's Eve they stood on the same rooftop as the year before, fireworks exploding overhead. Hudson's heart, now strong and steady, beat in time with Dominic's. We survived the denial, Hudson said. Now we're rewriting the rules. Dominic kissed him softly. Together. The Senate hearing room in Washington smelled of polished wood and nervous sweat. Hudson sat at the witness table in a crisp navy suit Dominic had helped him choose, heart monitor hidden beneath his shirt just in case. Cameras rolled. Senators leaned forward. Dominic sat in the front row, steady gaze locked on Hudson's. When it was his turn, Hudson spoke clearly, voice carrying the weight of every sleepless night, every whispered reassurance, every sketch that had kept him alive. I was 32 when a doctor decided my love for another man made me unworthy of surgery. That decision nearly killed me. But worse, it told me I was disposable because of who I am. Today I stand here not just for myself, but for every patient who was ever flagged, delayed, or denied because of outdated bias coded into systems we trust with our lives. He described the emails, the fear, the way Dominic's love had become his lifeline. He spoke of the men in his support group, of Marcus, of the mural they painted together. The room was silent except for the scratch of pens and the occasional sniffle from the gallery. Dr. Harlan testified next, pale and sweating. He claimed he had followed protocol. The senators dismantled him with the new study data. By the end of the day, the committee announced immediate federal guidelines banning orientation-based risk profiling. Outside on the Capitol steps, Hudson and Dominic embraced as reporters shouted questions. Snow fell softly around them, catching in Dominic's curls. You did it, Dominic whispered. Hudson smiled. We did it. Back in Chicago, the hospital chaos reached its peak. Class action lawsuits flooded in. The board dissolved. New leadership promised sweeping reforms and hired LGBTQ plus medical advocates. Hudson received a personal invitation to consult on their new equity policies. He accepted, bringing Dominic along for the first meeting. Walking the same corridors where he had once been denied felt surreal, but empowering. In the very room where Dr. Harlan had closed his chart, Hudson now helped write the rules that would protect the next patient. Life settled into a new normal. Hudson's heart remained strong. He and Dominic bought a small house in the suburbs with a backyard for future dogs and maybe kids. On weekends they hosted barbecues for the support group, laughter echoing where silence once lived. Marcus became a regular, sharing stories that bridged generations. Hudson's mother visited often, now calling Dominic's son without hesitation. Tyler sent awkward but sincere texts checking in. One crisp autumn evening 2 years after the hearings, Hudson and Dominic stood on their back porch watching the sunset paint the sky gold. Hudson turned to the man who had never left his side. "Remember when they said our love was a risk factor?" Dominic laughed softly. Turns out it was the cure. They kissed as the last light faded. Two American men who had stared down prejudice and emerged stronger. Their story now part of a larger change. True or false? The hospital's initial denial of treatment to Hudson was justified by medical concerns rather than prejudice?